She thought I was just a womb, a vessel, something disposable that she could push around while she took over my home, my husband, and my life. What she didn't realize is that wombs are vaults. They protect what matters most. And I was done carrying anything for anyone but myself. This is the story of how I went from doormat to strategist, and how the woman who tried to make me homeless ended up losing everything instead. If you think revenge is always loud and messy, think again. Let me tell you how I made her homeless. Before everything collapsed, my life was quiet, not perfect, but intentional. I had carved it carefully out of years of uncertainty. My mother died when I was 12. Foster homes followed. Schools with gray ceilings and cafeteria lunches where no one sat beside me, but I held onto one thing. I would never belong to chaos again. When I met Marcus, he felt like proof that safety was possible. He listened, he didn't interrupt, he remembered things. We met during a restoration project on the east wing of a historic estate. He was charming and soft-spoken, the kind of man who didn't need to take up space to feel powerful in it. I didn't fall quickly, but I fell completely. We married in the spring. Small ceremony, no fuss. He insisted we live near his family's estate, in the old carriage house that had fallen into disrepair. I didn't mind. I liked building things from bones. That house became my sanctuary. I repainted every beam, refinished the floors, sketched a nursery with a sun-facing window and pale green walls. I imagined our child growing up between those walls, surrounded by quiet love and good history. Vivienne, his mother, visited often, always dressed in cream and pearls, as if mourning something beautiful. She had a way of looking at me that felt clinical. Kind words, but too measured. Like I was being evaluated, she'd place a hand on my shoulder and say, "You're doing your best, dear," in a tone that sounded like pity wrapped in lace. At first, I tried to bridge the gap. I baked for her, invited her to dinner, shared pieces of my life in the hopes that something would reach her, but her eyes never softened. She complimented my home while changing things in it without asking. She bought throw pillows that clashed with everything I had chosen. She rearranged the nursery furniture before we were ready. I miscarried the first time at 8 weeks. Marcus held me all night. Vivienne brought soup the next morning and said nothing about the baby. When it happened again 6 months later, her silence became suspicion. She started asking odd questions. "Do you take your vitamins? Are you sure your bloodline doesn't carry anything?" By the third loss, her comfort had turned into cold assessments. She told Marcus I should see a different doctor, suggested adoption in the same breath she talked about family legacy. Still, I said nothing. I thought if I just healed, if I just stayed strong, if I just loved hard enough, she would stop seeing me as an intruder. I didn't realize she never would, because to her, I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was just a placeholder, a vessel, and eventually she would act on that belief in a way I never saw coming. It began with subtle shifts, small things just out of place. The electricity bill, usually in my name, now came addressed to Vivienne Langford. The landscaper, whom I hired and paid monthly, told me he had received a new contract with the owner. At first, I thought it was a mistake, or maybe Marcus had done something without telling me. He had a way of smoothing things over that sometimes crossed into avoidance. But then the locks changed. I came home one afternoon from a lecture to find the key I'd always used no longer worked. I knocked, feeling ridiculous, and Vivienne answered the door with a linen apron on, acting surprised to see me. She tilted her head and said, "Oh, you're early. I was just airing out the rooms. You don't mind, do you?" That night, Marcus called from a hotel in Chicago. Work had taken him out of town for 3 days. He sounded distracted, guilty somehow, and I knew then that he had no idea what was happening. The next morning, I found the envelope, plain white, tucked under the nursery door. Inside was a legal document, a property transfer agreement, signed, notarized, filed. The carriage house had been placed into the Langford Family Trust, Vivienne's trust, and next to the signature line where mine should have been, there was my name written in slanted ink, forged perfectly. My throat closed, my hands shook, but not from rage. It was disbelief. That kind of quiet, nauseating shock when you realize you were never in the room where decisions were made. You were always outside the door. I confronted her. She sat on the velvet settee, sipping her tea with a stillness that chilled me. When I asked why, she didn't pretend. She didn't flinch. "Because you were never meant to hold it," she said. And when I asked her how she could do this to someone who had only tried to be family, she smiled without warmth and answered, "You were always temporary, just the womb." Something inside me went very still. It wasn't anger I felt in that moment. It wasn't even grief. It was clarity. A terrible, sharp knowing that she had never once seen me as real. I was function, I was decoration, and now I was displaced. I walked out of that room without speaking again. I went to the sunroom, opened my sketchbook, and turned to a blank page. If she wanted legacy, control, and silence, then I would give them to her, but not in the way she expected. I didn't cry, not then. I didn't scream or pack a bag or beg Marcus to fix what had already been signed away. I simply moved through the house as if nothing had happened, because that's what Vivienne expected. Compliance, shame, quiet retreat. But I know buildings, I know the way foundations hold secrets, and I know how to trace every line back to its origin. I spent that first week cataloging everything. I photographed the deed, studied the signature, pulled out every email Marcus had ever sent that included property details, financial plans, and digital receipts. I marked the changes in her handwriting, tracked dates, stored copies in a hidden drive. Then I called Clara Yates. Clara wasn't a friend in the way most people imagine. She had been a client once, a preservationist who needed help fighting a developer's plan to gut a 19th century home in the district. I had helped her draft a restoration proposal that saved the building. She owed me nothing, but when I told her what had happened, she said one thing. "Let's see what she left uncovered." Clara brought in a contact from her firm, quietly. No court notices, just examination. We started with the deed transfer. It had been filed under an old loophole that allowed internal trust transfers without new owner signatures under specific conditions. But that clause had expired 2 years prior. What Vivienne used was not just invalid, it was fraudulent. And then we found the clause. Buried deep in the original Langford Trust was a stipulation. Any spouse legally removed from property tied to inheritance without their documented consent could trigger a trust review. If proven, the current estate holder would lose legal stewardship. Vivienne had been so focused on control, she hadn't bothered to check the older papers. She thought I would fold, not research. At night, I returned home like nothing had changed. She would pass me in the hallway, smug in her imagined victory. Sometimes she would drop passive lines like, "Maybe it's time you thought about going back to work full-time. The house is a lot to manage." I nodded, smiled, watched. And I started documenting every structural change she made to the property without consulting the Historical Society. The paint she used in the dining room, too modern. The antique fireplace cover she removed and replaced with brass, a direct violation of preservation code. She wasn't just cruel, she was careless. I stayed in the guest room for 3 weeks. Marcus, still out of town, caught up in board meetings and oblivious conference calls. I left messages for him. Light ones. I didn't tell him yet. He had to come home to see it. I wanted him to feel the absence, the shift in energy, the way it no longer smelled like us. And when he did, I needed to be ready, not as a victim, but as the rightful owner of the next move. By the time Marcus returned, everything was already in motion. He walked through the front door with a tired smile, suitcase in one hand, phone in the other. I watched his face change as he looked around. The rug he loved was gone. The photographs on the mantel replaced with oil portraits of Langford ancestors, a bowl of citrus where our wedding bowl used to sit. His mother's presence had spread through the house like mold beneath wallpaper. He hugged me, I let him, and I said nothing. That night, I sent him a file. It included the forged deed, annotated, the side-by-side signature comparisons, the documentation from the registry confirming Vivienne's unauthorized renovations. But it was the letter I attached that held the weight. I had written it weeks ago and left it untouched. Not dramatic, not cruel, just true. I told him what she said to me, how she looked me in the eye and stripped me down to biology, how she made herself queen of a castle I built with my own hands, and how, despite all that, I still hadn't fought back. Not yet. He didn't reply. But 2 days later, he was standing in front of me in the sunroom, holding the letter like it was burning his fingers. He said, "I see it now. I'm sorry. Tell me what to do." So I told him. He gave me access to the family trust archives, something only he could do as the primary heir. We printed the original documents, highlighted the clauses, and sent them to Clara's team. They drafted a private motion, estate mismanagement, property fraud, and trust violation. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet. It was pressure. Then came the historical complaint. I filed it myself, attaching a detailed report of every unauthorized change Vivienne had made to the landmark structure: paint, fixtures, furniture, structural revisions. Clara said it would take weeks. It took 5 days. The registry sent a notice of pending inspection with a warning that violations could result in legal penalties and public delisting. I left the notice folded on the foyer table where she would find it. I wanted her to read it in silence. The next day, I rearranged the nursery. Not the one upstairs, the one I had started sketching for myself. A new room, my room. Clean lines, blank walls. Vivienne tried to speak to me, asked if I had sent the complaint, asked if Marcus had mentioned the trust. I just looked at her and said, "You always did love legacy. Let's see how well it holds under inspection." She laughed then, like I was a child playing pretend. But behind her eyes, I saw it. The first flicker of doubt, the kind that spreads fast when a woman stops reacting and starts rebuilding. She didn't know what was coming next. And I made sure she never saw it from the front door, only from the edge. I asked for one conversation. No lawyers, no threats. Just the three of us in the parlor, Vivienne, once filled with lavender sachets and judgment. She arrived 10 minutes early, as if punctuality could somehow disguise guilt. Marcus stood by the fireplace, arms folded, lips pressed into a silence he had never known how to keep. I laid everything on the table. The original trust documents, the notarized proof of forgery, the digital correspondence showing the timeline, the letter from the landmark registry confirming her violations and pending fines. Then I placed a single page in front of her, the private motion of estate transfer to be filed with the trust board if she did not comply. She picked it up with a gloved hand and scanned it slowly. Her expression didn't shift. She had been rehearsing that face her whole life. "This is dramatic," she said finally, as if I had planned an opera and not a reclamation. I kept my tone level. No raised voice, no venom. "You used my miscarriage to position yourself. You forged my name. You occupied my home. This is not drama. This is consequence." Vivienne turned to Marcus, waiting for him to play his usual part, to buffer, deflect, but he didn't move. He looked at her like a stranger. "You lied to me," he said quietly. "You made me think she was losing herself. All this time you were taking pieces of her one by one. I see it now, and I won't defend it anymore." Vivienne's voice rose then, high and brittle. I did what was necessary to protect what's ours. Legacy matters, Marcus. That house is Langford history. You married someone with no family, no bloodline. She doesn't understand. That's where you're wrong, I said. I understand exactly what legacy is. It's not heirlooms and trust funds. It's what you leave behind when no one's looking, and yours is rot. She stood. Her hands trembled now. You think this gives you power? Making me leave? You think you've won? I didn't answer her. I turned to the door as two officials entered the room, one from the historical board, the other a court officer to witness voluntary estate relinquishment. Clara followed behind, clipboard in hand, silent as justice. Vivienne stepped back like the room had tilted. I gave her one last chance. Sign the withdrawal. Vacate within 10 days. No court record, no press. She looked at Marcus again. He didn't speak, just stood next to me, still and clear. Vivienne picked up the pen. Her hand hovered. Then she signed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no parting shots, no screams, just the soft drag of ink across paper and a woman realizing she was no longer in control. As she left the room, I noticed she had left one of her antique rings on the table. It glinted in the afternoon light, too heavy for the hand that no longer ruled this house. I didn't touch it. Some relics belonged to the past. She was gone by the end of the week. No farewell, no apology, just a quiet departure that left behind the scent of rosewater and something sourer resentment that had nowhere left to land. Her things were boxed by a service. I didn't see her off. I didn't need to. Vivienne relocated to a rental outside the town border, a sterile 2-bedroom with no garden, no parlor, no curated history to flaunt. Her name no longer carried weight on local boards or committees. Whispers moved fast in circles where legacy used to open doors. People noticed her absence from the Langford estate. They asked questions. She offered no answers. The inspection fines came first. Then the estate review board sent formal notice. All Langford family properties would now require dual oversight. She was no longer the estate's steward. Her signature carried no legal weight. Clara helped me file for full reinstatement on the deed. My name now sat alone on the title. No asterisk, no shared ownership, no trust-bound footnote, just me. Marcus stayed, but not in the way he had before. He moved into the guest house, said he needed time to unlearn what he had accepted for so long. I didn't ask for promises. I told him the truth. I had loved him, and maybe still did, but I would never again love small. If he wanted to stay in my life, he had to meet me where I lived now, on solid ground, no shadows. We spoke often. Some days were easy, others weren't. He apologized in quiet ways, repairing the wall his mother had damaged, bringing back the swing I had built before the first pregnancy, sitting with me without trying to fix anything. But I didn't orbit him anymore. I had recentered. The house shifted too. The nursery no longer felt like a room waiting for sorrow. It became a place for light. I left the door open. I painted the walls again. Not green this time, but a soft mineral blue, the color of calm mornings. People asked if I would press charges. I didn't. Some punishments don't require courtrooms. Vivienne lived in the shell of her own design, stripped of influence, cut off from the legacy she worshipped. She had turned me into a tool, and in doing so, had misjudged the one thing I had always known how to do. Build. Not for her, not for Marcus, for me. And now, everything she tried to claim was mine again. Not because I screamed, not because I begged, but because I stayed steady long enough for the truth to settle like dust after a storm. And when it cleared, she was the one standing outside. A year passed. Not fast, not in a blur. It passed the way healing does, quietly, with repetition. I began my mornings in the sunroom again, light spilling through the tall windows, the air no longer feeling borrowed. I brewed tea in silence and let the quiet stretch, not like an emptiness, but like a home finally unoccupied by expectation. I didn't rebuild everything she touched. Some things I let go of completely. The velvet drapes she installed were donated, her porcelain dishware boxed and left on the curb. But I kept one thing: the rose bush she planted just beyond the porch, the one she claimed was too fragile for our soil. I tended it every morning. By autumn, it bloomed for the first time. That same week, I returned to the nursery. I didn't bring in a crib, I didn't hang stars or lullabies. I placed a single chair in the corner facing the window and a woven rug beneath it. I sat there for hours, not waiting, just present. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't come with milestones or ceremonies. Sometimes it's just the absence of intrusion, the gentle return of your own rhythm. Marcus visits the house often. We speak kindly. There's no performance left between us. He has changed, but I no longer see him as the center. We orbit in a different pattern now. Separate, but not unkind. One afternoon, I walked to the edge of the garden and planted a new rose beside the old one. A pale blush variety I had once seen in a magazine and bookmarked without thinking. Next to them, I placed a small brass plaque. Not a dedication, just words that felt truer than any apology I never received. It read, "Legacy is what remains when silence is not mistaken for surrender." I stepped back and watched the sunlight catch on the metal, soft and clean. And for the first time since all of it began, I felt still, not frozen, rooted. She had called me just the womb. Funny, really. Because in the end, I gave birth to something far more lasting than lineage. I rebuilt my life with precision. I named myself whole, and I stood in the home she tried to take, not as someone left behind, but as the one who remained.